Peace be upon you and welcome to Connect Quran. This platform presents interpretation of the Quran considering its systematic arrangement of topics, unlike other available translations or interpretations, which makes it easy to follow along and to truly grasp Quran's wisdom and guidance. In this video, we will cover section 5.0 and go through verses 63 to 66 and 93 to 96. And these verses provide Allah's warning to wrongdoers and forewarning for the true believers. Here is the outline of this presentation. First of all, we will go through the context and structural organization of this section. Then we will cover translation and interpretation of the verses. While going through this, we will address a common misconception about a mountain being physically raised above the children of Israel or Bani Isra'il. And will inshallah explore what does the verse actually talk about. So let's begin with the context and structural organization of this section. Let's take a quick peek how the information is flowing so far in this second chapter of the Quran. In the first section, in response to our prayer for guidance in the first chapter, Quran's authenticity is established as a divine guide. And it is described how people respond to Allah's guidance in three different ways, which is linked to the second section, outlining people's eternal destinations based on their responses to Allah's message. This section further reminds people that Allah did not force them into this eternal reward system, but rather it was their own choice, and they voluntarily entered the covenant with God. It also provides details like where people lived prior to entering the covenant with God, and why did they enter the covenant at first place, and whether or not all the people entered the covenant. Then in the next section, people who believe in one true God and His guidance, but ignore, misuse or abuse it because of their superiority complex, are reminded to uphold their covenant with God. And they are also provided with a path forward for doing this. Then in section 4, such people are reassured about the integrity of accountability in the hereafter, and the superiority complex is completely dismantled for everyone. Then here we come to section 5, where people with superiority complex are warned to mend their ways before it gets too late, or else be prepared to face the consequences and to get punished. At the same time, true believers are forewarned about the actions of the wrongdoers, so they can stay vigilant. This section further articulates the required actions for the people who volunteer to mend their ways, and required precautions for the true believers. So this is a bit of context of section 5, and before talking about the structural organization, I would like to note that I just presented the big picture here, or you can say the horizontal dimension of the content, and I didn't talk about the vertical dimension, which is the depth. That's because it would have made this figure very complicated. So you should watch previous videos to better understand the vertical dimension of these sections. And I would like to stress that we need to grasp both horizontal as well as vertical dimensions to get the full context and thus to better understand the Quran. Now let's see how this section 5 is organized. So 4 verses from the top and 4 verses from the bottom part of this section form the outer topic. And we have learned now from the previous sections that the Quran adopts this structure when two different but related aspects or two different sides of something are addressed. And in this case, on one side, Bani Isra'il are warned to mend their ways before it gets too late. And just a refresher for everyone that Bani Isra'il are those descendants of Israel who believe in one true God and His divine guidance, but ignore, misuse, or abuse it because of their superiority complex. And they are used as symbolic figures in the Quran, which means if we meet these characteristics, for example, we believe in one true God, we believe in His guidance, but we ignore and misuse or abuse His guidance, then when Quran addresses Bani Isra'il, it is also addressing us. So, on one side, there is warning for Bani Isra'il and for all those people they represent to mend their ways before it gets too late. And on the flip side, there is forewarning for them, where they have been reassured that punishment is inevitable for the wrongdoers, because no one is exempted or will be treated differently in the hereafter, as we have learned in section 4 of this chapter. Now, if we pay attention to the word wrongdoers, it also has two sides. For example, the actions of Bani Isra'il are detrimental for them, which is a warning for them. But on the flip side, there is a forewarning for the true believers that the actions of wrongdoers could be detrimental for true believers if they won't be mindful or they don't stay vigilant. And we will see why later in this video. Now the question is, what comes in between warnings and forewarnings? That's right, required actions and precautions. So the inner topic outlines the required actions for Bani Israel and the people they represent, as well as required precautions for the true believers. Let's rearrange this section now. The inner topic of this section is further broken down into 4 standalone sections. 2 of these sections are directly addressed to wrongdoers, and 2 of them are directly addressed to true believers. However, the message presented in each of these subsections is equally applicable to both groups, wrongdoers as well as true believers. For example, the presented required actions for the wrongdoers can be flipped, and they will become required precautions for the true believers, and vice versa. Also, these subsections are connected from the top to the bottom, and the last subsection is then connected to section 6 of this chapter. In this video, we will only cover the outer topic, and we will inshallah fill in the blanks for the inner topic in 4 separate videos. So, let's begin with the translation now. This slide is just for your reference, and here are some keywords along with their meanings. One word I want to highlight is Tur, which could refer to mountain, limit, bound, state, condition, or anything separating. And if we combine all these meanings, then it would refer to a mountain or mountain range that has clear bounds, separating it from other mountains or mountain ranges, or even from other land type. With this keeping in mind, let's go through the translation. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَإِذَا أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ, and we took a voluntary covenant from you before sending you to this world to remain mindful of Allah by adhering to His latest guidance. This is a reference to section 2 of this chapter, so remember that it's not just children of Israel, but we too have a covenant with God. So while they are being directly addressed here, the message is equally applicable to all those people who adopt their ways and don't follow the Quran the way it should be followed because of their superiority complex. So the verse reads, we took the covenant from you, and then according to the covenant, وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ, We raise the mountain with separating bound above you, which means your test has begun now, and you have to limit yourself within the bounds that have been defined by Allah's guidance. Let's take a moment to better understand what does it mean. These are just two different graphics to convey the same message. So when Allah says that He has raised the mountain with separating bound above you, it means that Allah has established a firm bound or boundary for your test. Notice Allah did not say that He has put the bound around you, like on the ground surface, because that could have been misinterpreted as Allah is forcing people to stay within the bounds. So this metaphorical statement makes it clear that it's on to us whether we stay within the bounds or we move away from it. But we cannot move the bound with us, nor anything else, for example wind, can move it for us, because the bound is firm like a mountain. Now, according to our covenant with God, if we stay within the bound, we will get everlasting paradise. And if we move out of the bound, we will get everlasting hell. However, Allah is very merciful, so He does not rush to punish us if we step outside the bound, but rather He gives us wake-up calls in the form of sufferings, so we may realize that we are standing on the wrong side. And if we don't respond to warnings, then we may get punished through sufferings, or through the most severe punishment of this world, which is getting our hearts sealed. We won't feel it now, but we will face its consequences in the hereafter. So we must get back inside the bound as quickly as possible and remain vigilant to stay inside until we die. And remember, people inside the bound also go through sufferings, because they are tested for their sincerity and truthfulness in being devoted to God. And if they would not have suffered, then everyone would just have stayed inside the bound to avoid sufferings, and it could not have been a real test. Please note that this is a metaphorical explanation, which means people can physically be next to one another, yet their location can significantly vary relative to the bound. Now let's go back to the verse. So since your test has begun now, with firmly established bounds, so here is what you should do now. خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاذْكُرُوا مَا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Take it firmly whatever we have given you, the code of conduct, and remember whatever is in it, means in the guidebook or in the code book, so you could remain mindful of your obligations all the time. But here is what happened next. ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. Then after that you have turned away from your obligations, meaning you stepped outside the bound. فَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ لَكُنْتُمْ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Had Allah's favor was not on you, along with His mercy, to grant you extra time for realization and returning back inside the bound, you would have become losers long ago. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمُ الَّذِينَ اعْتَدَوْا مِنكُمْ فِي السَّبْتِ فَقُلْنَا لَهُمْ كُونُوا قِرَدَةً خَاسِئِينَ. And you have already learned about those who transgressed regarding Sabbath. So we said to them, be disgraceful apes. So it is a warning for you to remember that the granted buffer time is not unlimited. فَجَعَلْنَاهَا نَكَالًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهَا وَمَا خَلْفَهَا وَمَوْعِظَةً لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. So we made this exemplary punishment an abstention from being unmindful and disobedient to Allah for what was in front of it, meaning their own generation, and what was succeeding it, meaning future generations, and an exhortation for the mindful to continue obeying Allah. So learn from all this and mend your ways before it gets too late. So this was one side, and now let's go through the other side. وَإِذَا أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَكُمْ وَرَفَعْنَا فَوْقَكُمُ الطُّورَ خُذُوا مَا آتَيْنَاكُمْ بِقُوَّةٍ وَاسْمَعُوا. And when we took a covenant from you before sending you to this world to remain mindful of Allah by adhering to His latest guidance, and we raised the mountain with separating bound above you according to the covenant, so your test has begun with firmly established bounds, and it is your duty to take it firmly whatever we have given you, the given code of conduct, and listen. But قالوا سمعنا وعصينا وأشربوا في قلوبهم العجل بكفرهم. They said, we hear and we disobey, as they saturated their hearts with the love for the calf, being persistently unmindful regarding Allah's revelations. Which means our hearts have limited space, and if we fill them with unmindfulness, then mindfulness cannot get in because there is no space left for it. And this is a reference to people of Moses who distorted the message delivered by their messenger from we listen and we obey to we hear and we disobey. And remember, they were commanded to say this in prostration. So what we learn from this is, when we go in prostration, we should say we listen and we obey. Because we should not read Quran as if it's just telling us stories of the past people, but rather we should read it to find what we can apply in our lives. Now pay very close attention to the next part of this verse. قُلْ بِئْسَ مَا يَأْمُرُكُمْ بِهِ إِيمَانُكُمْ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Say, evil it is whatever your faith is instructing you to do, if you are believers. Clearly, Prophet Muhammad is not being told to say this to the people who took the calf for worshipping, because Prophet Moses delivered them the message already in verse 54 of this chapter. And also those people would have died long ago anyways. So Prophet Muhammad could only say this to the people around him. So the question is, who were these people to whom he was commanded to say this? Well, it is very clear from the last two phrases of this verse that this message is intended for the descendants of Israel and the people they represent, living around the messenger, meaning the Prophet Muhammad in this case, believing in Allah and His guidance, meaning the Quran, but following evil practices of earlier generations or their forefathers and distorting Allah's message, in this case delivered through the Quran. But let me make it clear that they were not distorting the Quran because it wasn't possible for them to produce something like the Quran. Check out my earlier videos on Quran's miraculous structure and on decoding the Quran's challenge to better understand why it wasn't possible for them. So all they could do was to distort the message delivered through the Quran. Remember, distorting the Quran and distorting the message delivered through the Quran are two different things. So, this is a forewarning for true believers of all times that Quran's message was being distorted even at the time of its revelation, but not the Quran itself. Which means we have to rely upon Quran and only Quran to get the true original message. The verse 243 is a classic example of how these people were distorting the Quran's message. I will inshallah explain this example in section 5.2. For now, let's just continue with our reading. So these people who were distorting the Quran's message did not fear the punishment of the hereafter because they were living in superiority complex, thinking they will get the paradise no matter what they do. Let's see how Allah responded to these so-called Muslims or believers. قُلْ إِن كَانَتْ لَكُمُ الدَّارُ الْآخِرَةُ عِندَ اللَّهِ خَالِصَةً مِّن دُونِ النَّاسِ فَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Say, if the home of the hereafter with Allah, meaning the paradise, is exclusively for you rather than the deserving people, then have wishful thinking of dying if you are truthful. Which means you are just making a false claim, and it has nothing to do with reality. وَلَن يَتَمَنَّوْهُ أَبَدًا بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. And they will never wish it because of what their hands have produced. Which means they know what they have been doing, and they have been intentionally distorting Allah's message. Wallahu alimun bil-zalimin. And Allah knows the wrongdoers. And if they truly believed that they will get paradise no matter what they do, then they should always be ready and looking forward to die. Because this world is nothing compared to paradise as explained in the second section of this chapter. But وَلَتَجِدَنَّهُمْ أَحْرَصَ النَّاسِ عَلَى حَيَاةٍ وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا. And you will find them to be the people who are more keen towards this present life than those who associate partners with Allah. So they even leave mushrikeen behind in pursuing this world. And it is important to note that they were not mushrik, meaning they did not associate partners with Allah. يَوَدُّ أَحَدُهُمْ لَوْ يُعَمَّرُ أَلْفَ سَنَةٍ وَمَا هُوَ بِمُزَحْزِحِهِ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ أَن يُعَمَّرَ وَاللَّهُ بَصِيرٌ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ. Each of them would have loved it if they could live 1,000 years. And this presumed reality to living 1,000 years is not going to displace or remove that person from the torment. And Allah is all insightful of whatever they do. So we learn from verses 93 through 96 that wrongdoers cannot escape punishment. And these 8 verses combined serve as a warning as well as forewarning for Bani Isra'il, representative of all those people who believe in one true God and His guidance but ignore and misuse or abuse it because of their superiority complex, to mend their ways before it gets too late, or be prepared for the punishment. And the same verses also serve as A warning for Bani Isra'il and the people they represent, meaning the wrongdoers, that their actions are detrimental for them. And a forewarning for the true believers to be mindful that the original message of the Quran was being distorted by the wrongdoers at the time of its revelation. So, here are our key takeaways. Wrongdoers with superiority complex concerning their accountability in the hereafter, for example, to have a compromised trial, reduced punishment, or tailored judgment criteria, should either mend their ways before it gets too late or be prepared for an everlasting hell. Second, wrongdoers were intentionally distorting the message delivered through the Quran. And once again, not verses of the Quran, but the message. At the time of Quran's revelation to Prophet Muhammad, even though they did not associate partners with Allah, they identified themselves as believers and they were living around Prophet Muhammad. Now the questions arise that what were they trying to achieve by distorting Allah's message, and how exactly they were distorting the message? These questions were not answered in this section, and they will not be answered in the next subsection as well, which is 5.1. But they will be answered in section 5.2. This is a common practice in Quran that it leaves some questions unanswered because we need to get more information first, or some facts need to be established prior to getting answers to such questions. So moving on, in relation to the broader topic, two questions arise. What are the required actions for the wrongdoers willing to mend their ways? Or on the flip side, what are the required precautions for the true believers? We will start finding answers to these questions from the next video, inshallah. Please like and share this video to support the content, and subscribe to the channel for staying current with the updates. Thanks for listening. And for those who are here for the first time, this channel Connect Quran is dedicated to developing a better understanding of the Quran by delving deep into its structured topics with remarkable compositions. So discover profound insights by following this sequential study of the Quran, starting with the video Quran's Interpretation, Thinking Outside the Box. Thanks again for watching the video. May peace and blessings be with you.